She fled her toxic relationship and went to her aunt's, not knowing a mafia boss owned the block. The taxi door slammed shut with a hollow, final sound, sealing Lena Carver off from the world she knew. The cab's red taillights bled into the humid Brooklyn night, disappearing around a corner and leaving her utterly alone on the cracked pavement. She clutched the single strap of her backpack, the fabric digging into her shoulder. It held everything she owned: 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, $700 in cash saved from tips, and a phone she had bought at a gas station 2 states away. She looked up at the building. It was 5 stories of grim brick, scarred with spray-painted tags that layered over each other in angry, vibrant colors. The front door was propped open with a moldy sneaker, and from the lobby, she could hear the muffled thud of a bass line and a man and woman arguing loudly. A group of men were gathered near the corner, their faces hidden by the shadows of their hoodies, their cigarettes glowing like fireflies in the gloom. Lena's stomach clenched. Every instinct, honed sharp by years of fear, screamed at her to run. She was a ghost, pale and trembling, standing in a place that felt too loud, too real. The air smelled of exhaust, damp garbage, and something sweet and savory cooking on an upper floor. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing glass, she forced her feet to move, walking past the men, head down, eyes on the ground, making herself small. She felt their eyes on her, a physical weight on her back, but no one spoke. She found her aunt's apartment on the 4th floor. The hallway light flickered, buzzing like an angry insect. Apartment 4B. She knocked, her knuckles barely making a sound. The door swung open and the smell of bleach and strong coffee washed over her. Aunt May stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. She was a broad, sturdy woman, her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was lined with worry, but her eyes, the same blue as Lena's, were warm. "You made it," May said. It wasn't a question. Lena couldn't speak. The dam of adrenaline that had held her together for the 48-hour bus ride finally broke. A sob tore from her chest, and she stumbled forward. May caught her arms strong, and pulled her inside, kicking the door shut. "It's all right, baby girl," May murmured, her voice rough but kind, rubbing Lena's back. "You're here now. You're safe." May's apartment was small, but it was immaculate. The kitchen linoleum shone, and a pot of something that smelled like tomatoes and garlic bubbled on the stove. She sat Lena at the small kitchen table. "This is your room," May said later, pointing to a small space off the living room, barely larger than a closet, containing a cot and a small dresser. "It ain't much, but the lock works." Lena just nodded, dropping her backpack onto the thin mattress. The word-a-lock echoed in her mind. May poured 2 mugs of coffee, sitting across from her. "There are rules here. Lena, you pay your share when you can. You clean up after yourself, and you stay out of trouble. I don't want that man of yours bringing his poison here." "He won't," Lena whispered, her voice raw. "He doesn't know where I am." "Good." May took a long sip, her eyes hard over the rim of the mug. "One more thing, this block isn't like where you came from. You keep your head down, the boys on the corner, you don't look at them, you don't talk to them, they're trouble." Lena nodded, picturing the shadowed figures she'd passed. "But they aren't the real problem," May continued, lowering her voice. "There's a man who watches this block. You'll see him. Black SUV, tinted windows, parks across the street. His name is Dante Morello." May said the name like it was a curse. "He owns the building. He owns the corner. He owns the cops who don't come around. He is not your friend. Lena, he's not trouble. He's the end of the line. You stay away from him, you understand me? Far away." Lena understood. She understood staying away. She had built her life around it. That night, sleeping on the cot, the sounds of the city pressing in, her mind betrayed her. It dragged her back to Brent. She wasn't just bruised, she was hollowed out. Brent had never hit her. Not once. He didn't need to. His weapons were his voice and his smile. He'd start with compliments, how she was so smart, so much better than everyone else. And then, slowly, he'd chip away. "You're lucky I'm so patient with you. That dress is a little much, don't you think? You want people to look at you?" He stalked her. The first time she'd tried to leave, he had called her 57 times in one night. He showed up at her job, smiling, charming her boss, bringing her flowers while whispering in her ear, "Did you really think you could leave me?" He controlled her money, convincing her to quit her job to focus on her art, and then holding the joint bank account over her head. He'd take her keys, her phone, "Just so you can have a break from the world, baby," leaving her isolated, trapped in their pristine, silent apartment, waiting for him to come home and tell her who she was allowed to be. Lena woke up tangled in her thin sheet, her heart pounding against her ribs, the ghost of his voice in her ear. She was free. She had to keep believing that. After 2 days of hiding in May's apartment, the walls started to feel like Brent's apartment. She had to get out. She needed milk. She needed air. She left just after noon, the sun high and hot, making the neighborhood seem less threatening. The street was busy. Women pushed strollers, old men played dominoes on a folding table, and music spilled from open windows. Lena kept her eyes down, her keys gripped tight in her pocket. She walked past a group of men leaning against a bodega wall. They were the same men from the other night. The corner boys May had warned her about. They were laughing, loud and brash. But as Lena approached, the laughter died. She tensed, bracing for a comment, a whistle, anything, nothing. They just watched her. And then, as if pulled by an invisible string, the men shifted, parting to let her pass. They didn't smile, they didn't sneer, they just moved, their eyes following her until she was past them. It was unnerving, that silent, synchronized respect. It wasn't for her. She felt a different kind of gaze, heavier, more focused. She looked across the street. There it was, the black SUV, parked parallel to the curb, its engine idling silently. It was enormous, polished to a mirror shine, the windows so dark they looked like solid obsidian. She couldn't see inside, but she knew, with a sudden, cold certainty, that he was in there. Dante Morello. He was watching her. Lena's breath hitched. She tore her eyes away and hurried into the bodega, the little bell over the door chiming frantically. She grabbed a small carton of milk and a loaf of bread, her hands shaking. The bodega was small, crammed with shelves, and smelled of stale beer and spices. She was the only customer. She turned to head to the counter, and a man was standing in the aisle, blocking her way. He was not one of the corner boys. He was older, with greasy hair and a sour smell. His eyes, small and bloodshot, raked over her. "Well, look at this," he slurred, a wet grin spreading across his face. "A new little bird on the block." Lena tried to step around him. "Excuse me." He shifted, blocking her again. "What's your hurry?" "Sweet thing. You look scared." "I like that." He was too close. She could smell the alcohol on his breath. This was it. This was the moment she always dreaded. Her throat closed up, the old, familiar ice filling her veins. She was back in her old apartment with Brent standing in the doorway, blocking her exit. That same look in his eyes. "Please," she whispered, "just let me pass." "I'll let you pass," he said, his voice dropping. "Right after you give me a smile, or maybe something else." He reached out, his hand grasping for her arm. The bell on the door chimed. The atmosphere in the small store didn't just change, it evaporated. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The man in front of her froze, his hand hovering in the air. His smile vanished, replaced by a sudden, sickly pallor. Lena didn't have to turn around. She felt the presence behind her. It was absolute, a void of silence in the buzzing, fluorescent light. "You're done," a voice said. It was not loud. It was deep, quiet, and rough, like gravel pouring over velvet. It held zero emotion. It was a statement of fact. The greasy man stumbled back, his hands shooting up in surrender. "Hey, Dante, I was just playing. I didn't know she was with you." "She's not," the voice said, closer now, "which makes this worse." Dante Morello moved into Lena's line of sight. He wasn't as large as she'd imagined, but his presence filled the entire store. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, but the clothes looked expensive, fitting perfectly across broad shoulders and a lean torso. His skin was olive, his hair thick and black, cut short, but it was his face that held her. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 20s, with a strong jaw and a straight nose. His features were beautiful, but they were cold, hard, like they'd been carved from stone. His eyes were the darkest brown she had ever seen, and they were fixed on the other man. "Get out," Dante said. The man scrambled, tripping over his own feet, and fled the store, the bell jangling in his wake. Silence descended. Lena was still pressed against the shelf, the carton of milk crushed in her grip. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps. Dante Morello turned his head. His eyes met hers. His gaze was not kind. It was not warm. It was analytical, intense, and deeply unsettling. He was looking at her like she was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. He took a half step toward her. Lena flinched. A small, involuntary movement, and his eyes narrowed, just slightly. "People like you don't walk around here without protection," he said, his voice still quiet. It wasn't a comfort. It was a judgment. It was the same thing Brent used to say. "The world is a scary place. Lena, you need me to protect you." "Thank you," she managed to say. The words were a wisp of sound. He stared at her for 1 second longer, a long, unblinking assessment. He gave a sharp nod, not to her, but to the anxious man behind the counter, and then he turned and walked out. The bell chimed softly, and he was gone. Lena paid for her items, her hands trembling so badly she dropped the change. She fled back to the apartment, taking the stairs 2 at a time, and slammed the door. Shooting the deadbolt home, May was in the kitchen, and she saw Lena's face. "What happened?" Lena told her. "The bodega. The man. Dante." May's face darkened with an anger that surprised Lena. "I told you," she snapped, slamming a pot into the sink. "I told you to stay away from him. I didn't go near him. He was just there." Lena's voice was high, defensive. "It doesn't matter," May rounded on her. "Now he's seen you. He's spoken to you. He stepped in." She jabbed a finger at Lena. "Don't talk to him. He doesn't do favors for free. Nothing that man does is free. You remember that. You owe him now. And he always collects." The warning settled over Lena like a shroud, heavier and colder than her fear of Brent. That night, the nightmares were worse. She woke up at 3 a.m, convinced Brent was outside the door. She was slick with sweat. The sheets twisted around her legs. She crept to the window, the one that looked down onto the street. She needed to see the empty pavement. The SUV was there, parked in its usual spot, a silent black shark in the orange glow of the streetlights. As she watched, the passenger side window glided down. She couldn't see his face, only the bright red cherry of a cigarette being lit. He was out there, watching. She wondered, with a shiver of a new, different kind of fear, if he was watching her window. If he knew she was awake, if he knew she was terrified, she was still an object to be watched. She had just traded one watcher for another. A few days later, she nearly ran into him, literally. She was heading down the stairs to check the mail, lost in her own anxious thoughts. And as she rounded the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors, she collided hard with a solid chest. She gasped and stumbled back, her hands flying up. It was him. Dante Morello stood 1 step below her, blocking the narrow, poorly lit stairwell. He was alone, up close. He was even more intimidating. He smelled faintly of expensive soap, tobacco, and something metallic, like old pennies. He didn't move. He just watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. There was no anger, no surprise, just that still, heavy assessment. Lena's heart was a trapped bird in her throat. "Sorry," she mumbled, trying to press herself flat against the graffiti-covered wall to let him pass. He didn't move. He studied her face, his gaze lingering on the nervous pulse in her throat. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He reached into the pocket of his leather jacket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He shook one out and held the pack up to her. "Smoke?" he offered. His voice was low and it vibrated in the small space. "No," she said, her voice tight. "Thank you." She was scared. She was terrified. But as he stood there, she also felt a flicker of something else. He wasn't sneering at her. He wasn't telling her to smile. He was just looking. He was curious. He held her gaze for another second. then slowly nodded, as if she'd answered a question he hadn't asked. He put the pack away, took the single cigarette, and placed it between his lips, unlit. Then he moved, stepping up and around her, giving her a wide berth, and continued up the stairs. She didn't breathe until she heard his footsteps fade on the floor above. That night, she couldn't settle. May was asleep, the apartment quiet except for the distant wail of a siren. Lena went to the window. The SUV was gone. For a moment, she felt a strange, sharp sense of relief. But then she looked down at the building's entrance. He was there. He was sitting on the top step of the front stoop, alone in the dark. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on his phone. He was just sitting, his forearms resting on his knees, his head slightly bowed. The streetlight cast long shadows across him, making him look less like a man and more like a statue carved from the city's concrete. He wasn't relaxing. He was presiding. He was perfectly still, the undisputed center of the block's chaotic energy. He was a lion sitting in the dark, guarding his territory. Lena stood at her window for a long time, watching him. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met. He was the man her aunt had warned her against. And he was the only reason she had been safe in the bodega. She watched the guardian of her prison, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than fear. She felt a profound, terrible curiosity. The $700 in her backpack felt thinner every day. Lena's small savings, scraped together from tips Brent hadn't known about, were meant to be a fresh start. But in Brooklyn, they were just a countdown. Rent to May, food, a new phone card. It was dwindling. The four walls of the apartment, which had at first felt like a sanctuary, were beginning to feel like a cage again. She needed a job. She needed a purpose other than hiding. She walked for blocks, avoiding the main avenues, looking for now hiring signs. She found one taped to the window of a small, tired-looking cafe called The Daily Grind. The windows were streaked, but the smell of roasted coffee was rich and real. The manager, Sal, was a weary man with a faded apron and shadows under his eyes. He looked at her lack of references, at the way she flinched when the milk steamer hissed. "I don't have a resume," Lena said, her voice quiet but steady. "I just moved here to be with my aunt, but I'm a fast learner, and I'll work any shift, any of them." Sal sighed, rubbing his forehead. "The 5 a.m. shift is open. It's just you and the baker till 7. Can you handle that?" "Yes," she said, relief making her dizzy. "Thank you." "Yes." He was hesitant. She could see it. He saw the same thing the man in the bodega had seen. A stray, something haunted, but he also saw the desperation. "Be here at 4:45 Monday. Don't be late, and don't steal from the register." Her first shift was terrifying. She walked the dark, silent blocks before sunrise, every shadow a threat, every stray piece of garbage tumbling in the wind a pursuer. But she made it. The cafe was an island of light. She learned the espresso machine, scrubbed the counters until they gleamed, and arranged pastries with a focus that bordered on obsessive. Just after 6 a.m., when the sky was a bruised purple, the bell over the door chimed. Dante Morello walked in. The cafe was empty. The baker was in the back. It was just him and her. Lena's hand froze on the portafilter. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He moved with a complete, predatory silence, his presence sucking all the air out of the small room. He wore a dark gray suit today, tailored so perfectly it looked more like armor than clothing. He stopped at the counter, his dark eyes scanning her, taking in the cheap apron and the way her hands trembled. "Coffee," he said. His voice was too deep for that early in the morning. "Black." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She worked, her movements jerky. She was intensely aware of him watching her. Every clink of the cup, every drop of coffee, felt deafening. She slid the cup across the counter. "That's $1.75, she whispered. He didn't move. He looked at the sad, empty tip jar on the counter. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded bill, and dropped it in. It was a $100 bill. Lena stared at it. A hot, painful flush crept up her neck. It wasn't a tip. It was a brand. It was a statement. "I own this block. I own this cafe. And I own the girl who works here." It was everything Brent used to do, dressing his control in the costume of generosity. "I can't accept this," she said, her voice shaking. Dante's eyes flicked up to hers. He didn't smile. "I don't care. Keep the change." He picked up his coffee and walked out. The bell chimed, and he was gone. Lena stood there, staring at the money, her newfound independence feeling like a joke. She walked home that afternoon, the $100 bill folded small and heavy in her pocket. A toxic weight. She felt angry, humiliated, and more than anything, deeply confused. She was so lost in her thoughts, replaying the encounter, that she turned down her own street without looking. She didn't see the two men until they were right in front of her. They were not the corner boys. The corner boys looked like soldiers. Watchful and disciplined, these men were different. They were thin, their eyes frantic and glassy, their clothes torn. They smelled of sweat and desperation. "Hey," the taller one said, his voice cracking. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. The other one moved to her side. "Just give us the bag," the tall one said, his eyes darting around. "And your tips. We know you work at the cafe. Just give it to us, and we walk away." Lena froze. The old, familiar ice flooded her veins, paralyzing her. This was the alley. This was the locked balcony. This was the moment where the world ended. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. The second man, impatient, reached out and grabbed her arm. "Did you hear him? Give us the—" "Wrong block." The voice was cold, bored, and it came from behind her. The man holding her arm dropped it like it was on fire. Both men spun around. Two of Dante's men were standing there. The ones Lena always saw in the corner. One was young, with sharp eyes. The other was built like a refrigerator. They hadn't run. They hadn't made a sound. They were just there. They hadn't drawn weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. The young one. Rico tilted his head. "You lost?" The two junkies scrambled backward, their hands up. "We didn't know," the tall one stammered. "We didn't know she was... We're going..." They turned and ran, disappearing into the alley they'd come from. Lena stood there, shaking so hard she thought her knees would buckle. Rico looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Boss said to keep an eye," he said, his voice flat. "You should walk faster." He and the other man turned and walked back to their corner, as if nothing had happened. Lena's paralysis shattered, replaced by a scalding, white-hot rage. Boss said to keep an eye. She wasn't free. She wasn't safe. She was a pet on a leash, and she hadn't even known it. This wasn't protection. This was just a different kind of owner. She didn't go home. She couldn't face May. She walked to the small, gritty park at the end of the block and sat on a bench, her anger simmering, cooling into a hard, cold resolve. She waited. She waited for hours, until the sun began to dip, until she knew he would be at the cafe. She stormed back into the daily grind. Sal was gone. The evening shift was on. She ignored them and marched to the back booth. He was there, just as she'd known he would be. He was sitting with two other men, older, in expensive suits. They stopped talking when she approached. Dante looked up, his expression unchanged, as if he'd been expecting her. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was low and trembling, but not with fear, with fury. One of the men started to stand up. "Hey, show some—" Dante lifted one hand, just an inch, and the man sat back down, his mouth snapping shut. Dante's eyes never left Lena's. He dismissed the other men with a jerk of his head. They vanished. "You," she said, planting her hands on the table. "You think you can just... what? Buy me with a tip? Send your guards to follow me? Who do you think you are?" He leaned back in the booth, sipping his espresso. He watched her, letting her burn. "I am not your property," she hissed, tears of rage stinging her eyes. "I didn't ask for your protection. I don't want it. I left a man who thought he owned me. I will not trade him for another. Do you understand me? Call them off." She was breathing hard, her whole body shaking. He placed his cup down with a soft click. The silence in the cafe was total. "I didn't ask," he said calmly, his voice a low rumble. "And they're not guards. They're watching the block. You're on the block. Call them off," she repeated. "No." The word was flat, final. "Why?" she demanded. Because you saved me in a bodega? Because you left that money? Because, he said, leaning forward just slightly, his eyes holding hers. If I didn't, someone else would. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, and he was simply stating the laws of his universe. Those two today, they were junkies, amateurs. They would have hurt you for $20. They saw you. You walk around with your head down. You look like a victim. You smell like fear. And out here, that's blood in the water. The men I have on that corner are not the sharks. Lena, they're the cage. Whether you're in it or not is your choice. But the sharks are still out there. She stared at him, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a cold, confusing despair. He wasn't wrong, he was just right. And that was worse. I hate you, she whispered. Dante finished his coffee. I don't care. Go home, you're safe. She was torn. For the next week, she lived in a state of profound conflict. She hated the feeling of being watched. She would see Rico on the corner and her stomach would twist with resentment. It was a gilded cage, and it felt suffocating, but it was also the first time in her adult life she had walked home from work without looking over her shoulder. It was the first time she didn't have to map out escape routes or clutch her keys between her fingers. The predators, the greasy men, the desperate ones. They didn't just ignore her. They avoided her. They saw her, saw the invisible brand Dante had put on her, and they crossed the street. She hated him for it, and she slept through the night for the first time in years. One night, the thick, humid heat of July finally broke the building's ancient wiring. The lights flickered, buzzed, and died. The rattling window unit in May's living room wheezed into silence. The apartment was plunged into a hot, oppressive darkness. Oh, for heaven's sake, May grumbled, shuffling around. The breakers must have blown again. Where are my emergency candles? Lena was trying to use her phone's flashlight to help when a heavy knock echoed through the apartment. It wasn't the knock of a neighbor. It was solid, authoritative. May pulled the door open. Dante Morello was standing on the landing, backlit by the beam of a heavy-duty flashlight. He was holding a small crate. Power's out on the whole grid, May, he said. Breakers won't help. Figured you'd need these. He handed her a box of long-burning emergency candles and 2 more flashlights. God bless you, Dante, May said, her earlier warnings completely forgotten in the face of the practical. I was just about to. Make sure you check on Mrs. Petrovich next door, he said. Her phone's probably out. I will. May took the supplies and turned. Lena, honey, come help me with Mrs. Petrovich, her hip's been bad. And just like that, May shuffled out, leaving Lena alone in the dark apartment doorway with him. He was still in the hall. The beam of his flashlight was pointed at the floor, illuminating them in a dim, upward glow. We have some candles, Lena said awkwardly. But thank you. These last longer, he said. He stepped just inside the door, placing the crate down. I'm checking the other floors. He was helping her light one of the candles on the kitchen table when the silence became too much. You're a very attentive landlord, she said, the words sharper than she intended. He paused, the match burning down in his fingers. He blew it out. My father owned this building. He let it rot. He didn't care if the heat worked or the roof leaked. He just cared that people paid. Lena was silent. He died, Dante said, his voice flat in the darkness. Violently, and I took over. He lit another candle. My mother left when I was a kid, disappeared. When you grow up with nothing, you learn one thing. You hold what's yours, and you never, ever let it go. You protect it. The darkness made confession easy. The shadows softened his hard face, made his voice seem more human. She found herself speaking before she could stop. I know about surviving, she whispered. The candle flame flickered, casting moving shadows on the wall. He turned his head, watching her. The man I left, she said, her voice barely audible. Brent, he liked to punish me for things I didn't do, for talking to a waiter or smiling at a cashier. She hadn't told anyone this, not May, not ever. Last winter, I smiled at the mailman. That night, Brent got angry. He said I was disrespectful, that I didn't appreciate him. Her voice was trembling, but it wouldn't stop. He locked me out. On our apartment balcony. It was snowing, I didn't have shoes on, just pajamas. She looked down at her hands, seeing the ghost of the frost on her skin. I begged him to let me in. I banged on the glass. He sat inside. He poured a whiskey and he watched me. For hours. He just watched me cry until I couldn't feel my feet. She finished, and the silence in the room was absolute, heavier than the heat. She was shaking, the shame and the cold washing over her again. Dante hadn't moved. He was staring at her, but his face was carved from granite. In the flickering light, she saw a muscle in his jaw clench, then clench again, a violent, contained spasm. He did that, Dante said. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. She flinched when he moved, but he was slow. He wasn't reaching for her face or her shoulder. He reached out and gently, with a shocking tenderness, covered her wrist with his large, warm hand. His thumb found the frantic pulse point on the inside of her fragile skin and just held it, a gesture of pure, grounding possession. That, he said, his voice a low, terrifying promise. Won't happen again? She stared at his hand on her skin. She should have pulled away. Every alarm bell, every lesson Brent had taught her, screamed that this was a trap. This was control. But it didn't feel like control. It felt like an anchor. The power was still out when he went to leave. They stood at the open door, the apartment behind her lit by a constellation of candles, the hallway a black void. He stood close, too close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the soap on his skin and the faint, clean scent of the night air on his clothes. He looked down at her. His eyes were no longer cold stone. They were dark, liquid and hot. He was looking at her mouth. She felt the pull. It was a physical thing, a magnetism in her stomach, drawing her forward. He was solid. He was a wall. He was the man who had vowed that her past would never touch her again. She rose on her toes, just a fraction of an inch. Her eyes fluttered. She was going to kiss him, and the terror slammed into her. It's a trap. He's a monster. You're just trading cages. She inhaled sharply and stumbled back, pulling her wrist from his grasp. Dante's expression tightened. The heat vanished, replaced by the familiar, cold mask. He looked at her for one long, hard second, as if memorizing her fear. He gave a sharp, curt nod. Then he turned and was gone, his footsteps silent as he descended into the darkness. Lena locked the door, her heart hammering. She bought a spiral notebook from the bodega the next day. She started to write. She didn't write about Brent. She wrote about Dante. He doesn't look at me with pity. Brent always looked at me with pity, right before he got angry, like I was a broken thing only he could fix. Dante. He looks at me like he's counting every piece, like he sees all the cracks and the broken parts and he's not afraid of them. He's not trying to fix them. He's just looking. He just sees me. A week passed, then two. The fear began to recede, replaced by a tentative, fragile new feeling. She woke up one morning and the gray, oppressive fog in her mind felt thinner. She found an old, half-used tube of tinted lip gloss in the bottom of her backpack. She hesitated, then put it on. She started pulling her hair back from her face. At work, she made eye contact with a customer. She smiled, a real, small smile. Dante still came in every morning. He still ordered a black coffee. He still left a folded bill in the tip jar, though now it was usually a 20, not 100. He saw the lip gloss. He saw the smile. He never said a word, but his men noticed. The corner boys, who used to just watch her with flat, dutiful eyes, now nodded when she passed, a brief, almost imperceptible sign of respect. They weren't just watching a victim anymore. They were watching someone who talked to the boss in the dark, someone who was changing. The phone in May's kitchen rang, a shrill, old-fashioned sound that made Lena jump. May wiped her hands on her apron and answered, her voice its usual gruff, "Yeah?" Lena went back to wiping down the counters, half listening. She heard May's voice change. It didn't get louder, it got lower, tighter. "Who is this?" May demanded, a pause. "No, she ain't here." And if I knew where she was, I wouldn't tell you." Lena's hands froze on the counter. The cloth was suddenly damp and cold. She knew. She knew that tone. It was the tone May used when talking about things that were broken, things that were dangerous. "Don't you call this number again," May said, her voice dropping to a near whisper of pure steel. "You hear me? There's nothing for you here. You stay away. You stay clear away from this family." May slammed the ancient receiver back into its cradle so hard the plastic cracked. She stood with her back to Lena, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "Who was that?" Lena asked, though her heart was already a cold, sick stone in her stomach. "Wrong number," May said, her voice too quick, too bright. "Just some salesman. Don't you worry about it." But May didn't turn around. And later that night, Lena saw her aunt standing at the window, staring down at the street, a look of profound, terrified worry on her face. May didn't tell her, but she didn't have to. The call was a crack in the ice, a sign that the monster she had run from was still hunting, still sniffing the air for her. Brent was looking. A few days later, the block's quiet tension changed. It grew brittle, sharp. The corner boys, who usually leaned and smoked, were now standing. They watched the cars that passed, not with casual interest, but with focused, predatory intent. Lena felt it on her way to the cafe, a static charge in the air. Dante was at the center of it. She saw him from her window, standing on the opposite curb in the harsh afternoon sun, a low, purple car, all gleaming chrome and dark windows, had pulled up. It didn't belong. 3 men got out. They were new, dressed in loud colors, their confidence arrogant and misplaced. They were trying to move in, trying to sell small, brightly colored bags of poison on his corners. Dante met them alone, and he didn't raise his voice. Lena was too far away to hear, but she could read the body language. The new men were posturing, gesturing wildly. Dante was perfectly still. He spoke, and one of the men laughed. Dante took 1 step forward. He didn't push. He didn't shove. He just moved into the man's space, his presence so absolute, so cold, that the laughter died in the man's throat. Dante spoke again, his head tilted, his eyes invisible behind dark glasses. One by one, the men got back in their car. Their movements were no longer arrogant. They were jerky, fast, scared. The purple car peeled out, its tires screaming in protest. Dante stood on the curb for a long time after they were gone, a silent message to anyone else who might be watching. The block was his. He had said so. That night, Lena was jolted from a shallow sleep by a sound that cut through the city's drone. It wasn't a firework. It was a sharp, flat crack, followed by another, and then a third. Gunshots. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scrambled from the cot, her breath caught in her throat, and ran to the window. The street below was empty, bathed in the sick orange of the streetlights. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed it. Then she saw him. He emerged from the alley across the street, not running, but walking with a stiff, labored gait. It was Dante. He stopped under a streetlight, his back to her, and leaned a hand against the brick wall. He was breathing heavily, his head bowed. As she watched, he looked down at his left side, then slowly brought his hand up to his shoulder. His shirt was dark, but the streetlight caught the slick, wet gleam of something darker. He was bleeding. He pushed off the wall and started walking, not to his SUV, but to the front door of her building. She didn't think. She didn't weigh the consequences or remember May's warnings. She just moved. She grabbed the first aid kit May kept under the sink and was in the hallway before he had even reached the 4th-floor landing. The apartment door was open. He saw her as he reached the top step. He froze, his face pale and slick with sweat, his jaw set in a rigid line. His eyes were black holes, wide with shock and adrenaline. He looked at her, then at the first aid kit in her hand, and a complex, unreadable emotion passed over his features. "Go back inside, Lena," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You're bleeding," she stated, her own voice sounding thin and distant. "I'm fine." He tried to brush past her, heading for his own apartment, but his left side scraped the wall, and a sharp, involuntary hiss of pain escaped him. "You are not," she said. This, she knew. She knew the look of a man trying to hide a wound, trying to pretend the pain wasn't real. Brent had done it with his ego. Dante was doing it with his body. She grabbed his right arm, his good arm, and tugged him. In the kitchen. Now. He was so much stronger than her. He could have thrown her off with a flick of his wrist, but he was wounded, and he was surprised. And for the first time, he did what she said. He sat heavily in the chair at May's small kitchen table, the one she'd sat at her first night. The overhead light was harsh, exposing the shallow cuts on his face in the dark, spreading stain on his black t-shirt, high on his left arm, near the shoulder. "Take it off," she said. His eyes met hers. The cold command in her voice seemed to steady him. He didn't argue. He hooked his right thumb in the collar of his shirt and, with a pained grunt, pulled it over his head, baring his torso. Lena's breath hitched. She had seen that he was in shape, but the reality of it was staggering. His chest and shoulders were a map of corded muscle. His skin taut and olive, a spidery web of old scars, pale against his skin, decorated his ribs, and then there was the new wound. It was a graze. The bullet had torn a bloody furrow through the thick muscle of his shoulder. It was deep, ragged, and bleeding sluggishly. It's just a graze," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "It didn't hit anything." "I know," he said, his voice tight. She opened the kit. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was surprisingly clear. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Get on with it." She poured antiseptic onto a clean cloth. He watched her. His stillness was absolute, but she could feel the heat rolling off his skin. The kitchen, which had always felt small, now felt suffocatingly tiny. It was just the two of them, the smell of antiseptic and the low, pained rhythm of his breathing. She pressed the cloth to the wound. He inhaled sharply, his whole body tensing as if struck by lightning. A low, guttural sound tore from his throat, but he didn't move. He didn't pull away. His right hand gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." He ground out. She worked in silence, cleaning the blood, her touch as gentle as she could make it. She was so close she could see the pulse beating in his throat, smell the metallic tang of his blood and the faint, familiar scent of his soap. His skin was burning. She'd never been this close to him, never touched him with such purpose. It was an intimacy that was almost unbearable, charged with a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. She focused on the task, on the clean line of his collarbone, the way his dark hair curled at the nape of his neck. Her fingers brushed his uninjured skin, and it was like touching a live wire. "All done," she said, her voice strained, as she taped the last piece of gauze in place. Her hands were trembling violently now. He didn't move to get up. He just sat there, bare-chested in her aunt's kitchen, watching her with those dark, bottomless eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving something else in its wake. "Why?" he asked. His voice was quiet, rough. "Why what?" She busied herself with putting the supplies away, unable to look at him. "Why did you do this? Why help me?" She stopped, her back to him. "You were hurt." "That's not an answer." He was right, it wasn't. She turned to face him. He was a killer. He was a gangster. He was the man who owned the block and dealt in violence, and he had just been shot for it. "Why did you leave your old life?" he asked, deflecting, his gaze intense. "The truth." She gripped the edge of the counter, the same one May had gripped. The truth. He didn't just lock me out on the balcony," she said, the words tearing their way out. "He told me he owned me. He said I was nothing, that I was garbage, that he was the only person on earth who would ever want me, and I believed him, for a long, long time." She looked at him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I didn't leave," she whispered. "I escaped. I ran in the middle of the night with nothing but cash from my tips, and I ran here, because I knew if I stayed, I wouldn't just be trapped, I would be gone. I would have disappeared inside myself." He stared at her. The silence in the kitchen stretched, filled with her confession. He looked at her not with pity, but with a raw, aching recognition. He saw a survivor. He saw a fellow ghost. He slowly, carefully lifted his right hand, and he didn't reach for her face or her arm. He reached for her wrist, the same one he'd held in the dark hallway. He captured it, his grip firm but gentle. His thumb stroked the fragile skin, right over her pulse. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers, and he lowered his mouth. He softly, reverently, kissed her wrist. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of allegiance. It was a brand, a promise. It was the same gesture Brent had used to trap her, but from Dante, it felt like the opposite. It felt like he was anchoring her to the world. Lena's breath stopped. Her knees felt weak. She didn't pull away. She didn't move. She just let him hold her, her heart hammering a wild, terrified, exhilarating rhythm against her ribs. He let her go, his gaze dark and heavy, and then he stood, wincing as the new bandage pulled. He picked up his ruined shirt and walked to the door. "Lock this," he said, without looking back, and he was gone. Lena locked the door. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood, her entire body shaking. She couldn't sleep. The cot felt too small, the air too hot. The image of him, the feel of his lips on her skin was burned into her mind. At 2 a.m, she gave up. She needed air. She crept to the living room window and quietly unlatched it, pushing it open. She climbed out onto the narrow, rattling fire escape. The city air was thick and humid, smelling of hot pavement and exhaust. She leaned against the iron railing, letting the breeze cool her face. A wisp of smoke drifted up from below. She looked down. He was on the landing directly beneath hers, 1 floor down. He was leaning against the railing, his back to the building, wearing a fresh shirt. He was smoking a cigarette, the red ember glowing in the dark. He was guarding his territory, even wounded. He must have heard her, because he tilted his head back and looked up. Their eyes met in the darkness. He didn't speak. He just watched her. She should have gone back inside. She should have run. But she was tired of running. Slowly, her heart in her throat, she swung her legs over the side of the landing and climbed down the iron ladder, her bare feet silent on the metal. She stopped on his landing, standing a few feet away from him. He took a long drag from his cigarette, his eyes never leaving her face. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "Neither should you," she replied, her voice soft. "Your shoulder." "It's fine." He looked out at the sleeping city. "You can't sleep." "No." They stood in silence for a long time. It wasn't the awkward silence of the stairwell or the tense silence of the kitchen. It was something else. It was shared. "Thank you," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. Before. She just nodded. He took one last pull from the cigarette and flicked it over the railing, a red arc that disappeared into the blackness below. He turned to face her. "You're a problem, Lena," he whispered. He wasn't angry. He was just stating a fact. "You don't belong here. You're clean. And this place," he gestured to the block, to himself. I'm not clean," she said, her voice shaking. "You saw, I'm a mess. I'm just as broken as this building." "No," he said, taking a step closer. He was so close now. She could feel the heat of him again. "You're not broken. You're just bent. He searched for the word. "You're real." He lifted his hand, the one that had held her wrist, and hesitated. He didn't touch her. He just hovered, his fingers inches from her face. "You look at me. And you're not scared, not in the right way." "You scare me," she breathed. "You terrify me." "Good," he rasped. He was closer now. His other hand came to rest on the railing next to her, trapping her. "But you're still here." "I'm still here." He looked at her mouth. She looked at his. The air crackled, the tension from the kitchen returning. But this time it was different. It wasn't about pain and fear. It was about this. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to bolt. She watched him come, her heart pounding a deafening drum. "This is a mistake. This is dangerous. He is dangerous." And then his lips touched hers. It was slow, it was uncertain, it was hesitant and soft. It wasn't a kiss of conquest, it was a question. His lips were firm, warm, and they tasted faintly of tobacco and something uniquely him. He didn't push. He didn't demand. He just held. He waited. Her fear battled with a desperate, aching need to be touched, to be anchored. She let out a small, trembling sigh, and her hands, of their own accord, came up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against her palm, matching her own. She kissed him back. It was just as uncertain, a soft press of her lips against his, but it was real. It was the first real choice, the first real touch she had made in years. He deepened it then, just slightly, his lips moving over hers, a gentle exploration. His hand finally moved, his fingers brushing her jaw, his touch rough but incredibly tender. And then, just as it was starting, he pulled away. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. His eyes were closed. "Go inside, Lena," he whispered, his voice thick. "Go back to bed, now." She didn't argue. She turned and fled up the ladder, not looking back. She locked the window, her lips tingling, her entire body alive. The next day, Dante was gone. His SUV wasn't in its usual spot. He didn't come to the cafe for his morning coffee. The block felt empty, and Lena's newfound bravery felt like a phantom. She had crossed a line. She had been too much, or not enough. She had invited him in, and he had run. The old, familiar script of rejection, the one Brent had written, played in her head. She'd made a mistake. The corner boys were still there, but they were different. They were tense. They watched her, not with their new respect, but with a sharp-edged anxiety. Rico actually stopped her as she left for work. "You be careful today," he said, his eyes scanning the street. "Walk fast. Don't stop." "Why? What's wrong?" "Just be careful." The tension was a knot in her stomach all morning. The cafe felt wrong, too bright, too exposed. She was wiping down the espresso machine, her mind a million miles away, replaying the kiss, replaying his absence. When the bell over the door chimed, she looked up, her heart leaping, hoping it was him. It was Brent. He stood there, smiling, that same, easy, handsome smile that had charmed her friends, charmed her family. He looked exactly the same. Khaki pants, a pressed blue shirt. He looked like he belonged. He looked like he owned the place. "Lena, baby," he said, his voice a warm, smooth caress that made her blood turn to ice. "My God, I have been looking everywhere for you. You had me so worried." He walked toward the counter. Lena was frozen. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible. This was her safe place. He couldn't be here. What are you doing here?" she stammered. "What do you mean, I'm here for you?" he said, his smile widening. But his eyes were cold. They were the eyes she saw in her nightmares. This is quite a place you found. A little dirty, isn't it? Not really you." He glanced around, then back at her. "Go get your things. Lena, we're going home. We can talk about this in the car." "No," she said. The word was a thin thread. His smile flickered. "Just for a second. Don't be difficult. You've had your little adventure. It's over. Come on." "I'm not going with you." He sighed. The picture of a patient, long-suffering partner. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, placing it on the counter. "I'll take a coffee. Black." His eyes held hers. The mimicry was intentional. It was a message. "I know what you've been doing. I see everything." She turned, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grab a cup. She made the coffee, her mind screaming, "He's here, he's here, he's here." She slid it toward him. He didn't pick it up. He pushed it back, and under it was a small, folded piece of paper. A note. His smile was back, bright and terrifying. "It's good to see you, Lena, but this little game is over." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper no one else could hear. "You will walk out of here and come home with me, or I will ruin you. I will burn this entire filthy block to the ground just to get to you. You understand me?" He winked, picked up his coffee, and walked out, the bell chiming cheerfully. Lena stared at the note. Her vision tunneled. She unfolded it. "Come home or I'll ruin you." She crumbled it in her fist, her whole body trembling. She ran to the bathroom and was violently sick. She hid the note, cramming it deep into the pocket of her jeans. She couldn't tell May. May would panic, try to run, and Brent would find them. She couldn't tell Dante. He was gone. He had kissed her and left. He was violent. He was a killer. He was just like Brent, just with a different uniform. She was alone. She was completely, utterly alone. That night, she avoided Dante. She saw his SUV back in its spot, but she kept her head down, her shift over, and ran up the stairs. She didn't go to the fire escape. She locked her bedroom door. She jammed the small wooden chair under the knob, and for the first time since she had arrived in Brooklyn, Lena Carver left the light on to sleep. Lena lived behind a mask of normalcy for 2 days. She went to work. She smiled at Sal. She scrubbed the counters until her fingers were raw, but inside, she was vibrating. A tuning fork struck with pure terror. Every chime of the cafe's bell was him. Every footstep in the hall was him. She threw the crumpled note into the kitchen trash, but she couldn't throw away the fear. On the third morning, May was taking out the garbage. She was quiet when she came back, her face a pale, grim mask. Lena was sitting at the table, trying to force down a piece of dry toast. May didn't speak. She just walked over and dropped the crumpled, coffee-stained note onto the table in front of Lena. "Come home or I'll ruin you." "I was wondering why you started sleeping with the light on again," May said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I was wondering why you look like a ghost. This is from him, isn't it? The one you ran from?" Lena couldn't speak. She just nodded. A wave of shame so profound it choked her. "He was here," Lena whispered. "At the cafe, he found me." May's face crumpled, the anger replaced by a deep, world-weary fear. "Oh, Lena, oh, baby girl, why didn't you tell me? We could have gone somewhere." "Where, May?" Lena's voice broke. "Where? He'll always find me. He said he'd burn this whole block down just to get to me." "He won't," May said, but her voice wavered. She picked up the note, her hand trembling. "He won't. There's one person who won't let him." "No," Lena said, her eyes widening in panic. "May, no, don't, you can't." But May was already out the door. Lena ran after her, her bare feet slapping on the linoleum. "May, please don't, you don't understand. He's just like him. He's dangerous." She followed her aunt up the stairs, to the 5th floor, the penthouse. May didn't knock. She shoved the door open. It was unlocked. Dante's apartment was nothing like she'd imagined. It was not opulent or dark. It was minimalist, almost empty, with huge, clean windows that looked out over the entire city. It was silent. Dante was standing by one of those windows, a phone to his ear, his back to them. He was in the middle of a sentence when he saw their reflection in the glass. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, his voice flat. He hung up and turned. He was wearing a clean shirt, his shoulder, she noted, moving without stiffness. His face was cold, impassive. He looked at Lena, his eyes lingering on her, and his expression tightened. He had been avoiding her. He had kissed her on the fire escape and then vanished for 2 days. "May," he said, his voice a low warning. "She needs help," May said, shoving past Lena. She was not intimidated. She was a mother hen, furious and terrified. She slammed the crumpled note onto a sleek, empty glass table. He found her, her ex, the one who hurt her. He came to her work. He left this. Dante didn't move for a long second. He looked at May. Then his gaze shifted to Lena, who was standing in the doorway, trembling, hugging herself. Then, slowly, he walked to the table and picked up the note. He read it. Lena watched his face. For a moment, there was nothing, just the cold, controlled mask. Then, something new, something she hadn't seen before. It wasn't the contained anger he'd shown the men in the purple car. It wasn't the pain tension from when she'd cleaned his wound. It was a rage so pure and so cold it was almost white. It was an absolute, terrifying stillness that was more violent than any explosion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. But the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. He crushed the note in his fist. "Where is he?" His voice was barely a whisper, a sound of compressed gravel and glass. We don't know, May said, taking a step back, finally sensing the thing she had unleashed. I didn't ask you, Dante said, his eyes locked on Lena. Where is he? I don't know, Lena whispered, tears welling. He just showed up. You were going to run, he stated. It wasn't a question. You were going to pack your bag and run again. What else am I supposed to do? She cried. He'll ruin me. He'll ruin everything. He won't touch you, Dante said. He was vibrating with a lethal, controlled energy. He walked past her, grabbing a jacket from the back of a chair. Where are you going? Lena panicked, grabbing his arm, the one she had kissed him with. Dante, no, don't. You don't know him. He's smart. He's charming. He's a dead man. He pulled his arm from her grasp and was gone. May rushed to Lena, wrapping her in her arms. It's okay, baby. He'll handle it. He'll fix this. But Lena knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was not a fix. This was an escalation. She had just traded one monster for another. Dante didn't just walk. He descended. His men, Rico and the others, saw him coming and snapped to attention, their faces pale. The rage was rolling off him in visible waves. Rico, he snapped. The white guy, the one who came to the cafe 2 days ago, blue shirt, khakis, smiled too much. Yeah, boss, Rico said, his eyes wide. We saw him. Thought he was just a customer. He's not. He's been sniffing around. Find his associates. Find out who he talked to. Find out where he's sleeping. I want him. Dante didn't wait. He went to the bodega, the one where he'd first saved her. The owner, Mr. Nazir, was behind the counter. He's been in here, Dante said. Mister? Nazir nodded, his hands shaking. Yes, Mr. Morello. Yesterday, a new man, asking questions about the block, about the girl at the cafe. What did you tell him? Nothing, Mr. Nazir said. Nothing, I swear. I said, we mind our own business here. Dante stared at him, his black eyes seeing everything. He's staying at the Beacon Motel, off the highway, room 201. He's got a contact, a low-level guy named Skinny, who's been feeding him information about this block. He thinks he's invisible. Mr. Nazir's jaw dropped. How did you... You're a good neighbor, Nazir, Dante said, dropping a $100 bill on the counter. You didn't see me today. He found Skinny in a back-alley card game. The interrogation was short, brutal, and happened in complete silence. Dante didn't need to ask questions. He just applied pressure, his eyes promising a death that was slow and cold. Skinny told him everything: the motel, the rental car, the fact that Brent had been laughing about the little Mafia boss who was protecting his girl. Dante returned to the apartment building hours later. The sun was setting. He was calm. The explosive rage had cooled, settled into something far more dangerous, a purpose. He knocked on May's door. Lena opened it. She'd been crying, her face was pale and puffy. He's at the Beacon Motel, room 201, Dante said, his voice flat. He's planning to come for you tonight, after your shift. Lena's blood ran cold. How do you... It doesn't matter. He stepped into the hall. I'm going to handle it. Handle it? She repeated, her voice rising in hysteria. What does that mean? Are you going to kill him? Dante just looked at her. The silence was her answer. No, she screamed, shoving him. It was like shoving a brick wall. No, you can't. That's not... I don't want that. That makes you him. That makes you a murderer. He put his hands on you, Dante said, his voice low and guttural. He locked you on a balcony. He threatened your life. He threatened my block. He dies. And then what? She shrieked, tears streaming down her face. What happens then? The police come. They ask questions. They'll look at me. I'll be tied to you. I'll be tied to a murder. I will never be free. He grabbed her arms, his grip hard, forcing her to look at him. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, his voice a raw whisper. The cold fury back. The night on the fire escape. You kissed me. And you had that note in your pocket. You had his poison on you. And you said nothing. Why? Because you scare me. She finally sobbed, the truth tearing out of her. Because you're just like him. You're both the same. You watch me. You control me. You decide who I can talk to. You decide what's safe. You use violence and money and fear to get what you want, kissing you. It was a mistake. I'm just a thing. A broken toy you both want to own. She was hysterical, hitting his chest with her fists, but he didn't even flinch. He just held her, taking the blows. Then his face changed, the rage, the coldness. It cracked. The mask broke. He softened. His grip on her arms gentled. He pulled her against him, not in passion but in a desperate, grounding embrace, his hands moving to her back, holding her as she sobbed. "I am nothing like him," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him. "Lena, look at me." He pulled her back, his large hands cupping her tear-stained face. His dark eyes were no longer cold. They were burning. They were in pain. "I would never hurt you," he said, his voice raw. "Do you understand me? Never. He hurt you. He put his hands on you. That is why he has to go. But I will not. I would never lay a hand on you. Ever." He stroked her cheek with his thumb, wiping away a tear. "But I will kill him if he touches you again," he vowed. "I will kill him if he even looks at you again. That is a promise." She stared at him, her sobs quieting. She was so tired of being afraid. I don't know what to do," she whispered. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice practical again, but the new softness remained. "Not tonight. He knows this building. He knows where you are. You'll stay with me." He didn't wait for an answer. He took her hand, pulled her from May's apartment. May was standing in the kitchen, watching, a silent, pained approval on her face, and led her up the stairs to his. He locked the heavy deadbolt on his door. The sound echoed in the quiet, minimalist space. There were no pictures on the walls, no clutter, just a few pieces of dark, expensive furniture, a wall of books, and the massive windows showing the glittering city lights. It was not a home. It was a fortress. It was a perch. You can take the bed," he said, gesturing to a door. "I'll be in here." Lena shook her head, her hands still trembling. I don't want to be alone." He looked at her, his gaze heavy, understanding. He led her to the bedroom. It was as sparse as the rest of the apartment, a large, low bed with simple white sheets, a single dresser, nothing else. She sat on the edge of the mattress. It felt too big, too empty. He stood in the doorway, watching her. "He can't get in here?" she asked, her voice small. "The elevator needs a key. The stairs have a steel door," he said. "No one gets in here unless I allow it. You are safe." She believed him. She sat there, her body thrumming with leftover adrenaline and terror, and for the first time, she felt quiet. The world outside, Brent, the fear. It was all still there, but it couldn't get through the walls. He didn't leave. He walked over, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor, and sat on the edge of the bed, a few feet from her. He didn't touch her. He just sat, a solid, breathing presence in the dark. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded. They sat in silence for a long time. Lena's breathing slowed. The tremors stopped. She was exhausted, but she was terrified to sleep. I can't," she said, her voice catching. "I'll see him." Dante looked at her. Then he made a decision. He stood up, took off his jacket, and unholstered the gun he'd been wearing at the small of his back. He placed it on the dresser, far from the bed. He kicked off his shoes. Then he lay down on top of the covers, on his back, his hands folded on his chest. He was on the very edge of the large bed, giving her as much space as possible. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "Close your eyes." Lena stared at his profile. This violent, terrifying man. He was giving her his protection, not with his gun, but with his presence. Slowly, she lay down, pulling the covers over her. She stayed on her side, facing him, her body coiled tight, but the minutes ticked by, and all she heard was the sound of his steady breathing. He didn't move. He didn't try to touch her. He was just there, gravity. An anchor in the storm. She slept. She woke hours later, in the deep pitch of the pre-dawn. She was cold. She had kicked off the covers. She shifted, and her hand brushed his arm. He was awake. She felt his muscles tense. "It's just me," she whispered. He turned his head on the pillow. In the faint glow of the city lights, she could see his eyes, open and watching her. "You're okay," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She didn't move away. She was so cold, and he was so warm. She scooted closer, just an inch, her fear of Brent finally, blessedly overshadowed by this new, complex need. "Lena," he warned, his voice thick. "Don't," she whispered. "Just don't. I'm so tired of being afraid, and I'm not afraid of you. Not like this." She moved again, her hand finding his chest, right over his heart. It was pounding. A hard, fast rhythm that matched her own. He was not as controlled as he seemed. He let out a long, shuddering breath, then slowly, as if moving against his own will. He turned onto his side, facing her. He lifted his hand, the one that had held her wrist, the one that had cupped her face, and he stroked her hair, his touch impossibly tender. "I told you," he whispered, his voice rough. "You're a problem. So are you," she breathed. He leaned in, and this time, there was no hesitation. His mouth found hers in the dark. It was not the uncertain, questioning kiss of the fire escape. This was a kiss of raw, desperate need. It was a kiss that said, "You are mine to protect, and I am drowning." It was possessive, but it was not controlling. It was deep, and it was hungry. She met him, her own desperation rising, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. She was so tired of being broken, of being a victim, and this man. He looked at her like she was a weapon. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "Are you sure?" he whispered. His voice was shaking, the most powerful, dangerous man she had ever met, and he was shaking. She answered by kissing him, her hands moving from his chest to his face, her fingers tangling in his short, thick hair. The night unfolded in a series of slow, reverent, and breathless moments. It was not a frantic, rushed collision. It was a discovery. Every movement was tender, every touch cautious, as if they were both afraid the other would break. His hands were large and rough, but they moved over her body with a painstaking gentleness, as if he were memorizing her. He whispered questions against her skin. Not "do you like this?" but "is this okay?" His control was absolute, but it was all focused on her safety, on her response. She held on to him like he was gravity, the only solid thing in her spinning world, their limbs tangled in the white sheets. His skin was hot against hers. She was awash in sensation, but more than that, she was awash in safety. She was in the fortress, in the arms of the lion, and for the first time, she was not prey. When they finally came together, it was a slow, deep, silent joining, a sealing of the promise he'd made, foreheads touching, hands gripping, hearts exposed. It was a claiming, and it was a surrender. When Lena woke, the sun was streaming into the room, bright and unforgiving. She was alone in the bed. The sheets were tangled, and the indentation of his body was still next to hers. But he was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. "Dante?" She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. The apartment was silent. The gun was gone from the dresser. He had left her, just like Brent always had. He'd gotten what he wanted, and he'd left her. The shame and the fear were so potent she felt sick. She had been a fool. She stood, her legs trembling, and saw a piece of paper on the dresser, next to where the gun had been. It was a folded note, and her heart stopped, thinking it was from Brent. She picked it up. It was Dante's handwriting. It was stark, masculine, and short. "Stay as long as you want. Lock the door. I'll be back." He was gone. But he was gone to hunt. He was gone to finish it. Dante was discreet. He sat in his car 2 blocks from the Beacon Motel, watching. He'd had his men check the room. Brent was still there, sleeping off a night of cheap whiskey, probably celebrating his brilliant plan. Dante was preparing. He was gathering information, watching the patterns, confirming Brent had no backup. He wanted to strike to remove the cancer from his block, but he stopped. Lena's voice echoed in his head. That makes you a murderer. I will never be free. He gripped the steering wheel. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to feel the man's life drain away under his hands for what he'd done to her. It was his nature. It was his solution. But for the first time in his life, his nature was at war with something else. He wanted her safe. But more than that, he wanted her free. And if he killed Brent, he would be tying her to his world, his violence, forever. He would become the thing she'd run from. He needed her permission. Lena broke down when she got back to May's apartment. She was wrapped in May's old robe, sitting at the kitchen table, just as she had on her first night. I don't know what to do, she sobbed into her hands. I'm so tired of men fighting over me. I'm tired of being the prize, the property. Brent wants to own me. Dante wants to protect me. But it's all the same. It's all about them. I just want to live. I just want to be left alone. May sat across from her, her face etched with a wisdom that only came from a long, hard life. She pushed a mug of hot, sweet coffee toward Lena. No, baby girl, May said, her voice soft but firm. It is not all the same. You're right to be tired, but you're wrong about them. She leaned forward. Brent fights for his pride. He fights because you defied him. He wants to break you. He wants to own you. Dante. He's a dangerous man. I won't lie. He's got a darkness in him I wouldn't wish on anyone, but he's not fighting for his pride. He's fighting for your peace. May reached out and covered Lena's hand. Don't you see? Brent wants you to be scared of him. Dante just wants you to not be scared at all. You have to pick, Lena. You can't be in the middle. You have to pick the one who fights for you, not over you. Lena looked up, May's words settling in her heart. Fighting for your peace. She knew what she had to do. She found him on the roof. He wasn't in his car. He was sitting on the ledge of the building, his legs dangling over the 5-story drop, looking out at the city as the sun set. She walked up to him, her footsteps quiet. He didn't turn, but she knew he heard her. He's still there, she said. Yes. She stood behind him. You didn't do it. No. Why? She whispered. He finally turned, looking at her over his shoulder. His face was torn. She saw the war inside him. Because you asked me not to, he said, his voice raw. Because you said it would trap you, and I won't be his replacement. She walked to the ledge and, before her courage could fail, she sat down next to him, her legs dangling in the open air, right beside his. He looked at her, surprised. She was terrified of heights, but she was more terrified of this half-life. May said, She said you were fighting for my peace. He looked away, back at the skyline. I don't know what I'm fighting for. I just know he can't be here. He can't exist. Not near you. Do it, she said. He froze. He turned his head, his dark eyes searching hers. What? Do what you have to do, Lena said, her voice shaking but her resolve absolute. She was done running. She was done being the victim. She was choosing. Handle him, end this, I don't care how. But you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that after tonight, I will never, ever have to look over my shoulder again. Promise me I'll be free. Dante stared at her, the setting sun catching the fire in her eyes. He saw her, really saw her. She wasn't a victim. She was a survivor, and she was giving him the knife. He slowly nodded. You have my word. You'll never see him again. You'll never have to look back. Dante did not kill him. Killing was messy, and it would have fulfilled Lena's fear. It would have tied her to a murder. Humiliation, he knew, was a more permanent, colder death. He arranged the meeting through a proxy, a message sent to Brent's motel room that promised a solution to his Dante Morello problem. Brent, arrogant and believing his own threats, walked right into the trap. The garage was in Red Hook, abandoned, smelling of rust, cold concrete, and the oily water of the nearby bay. Brent walked in, his footsteps echoing, expecting a negotiation. He found Dante and Rico and 2 others, standing like shadows against the far wall. This is a mistake, Brent said, his voice starting to shake, his charming smile faltering. I have money. I can—" "She's not for sale," Dante said. He was sitting on the hood of an old, dust-covered car, perfectly relaxed. He slid off, his movements slow. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Brent stammered, backing away. She's just an emotional girl. She's confused. I'll take her, and we'll be gone. You'll never see us again." Dante stopped a few feet from him. "You locked her on a balcony, in the snow, barefoot." The color drained from Brent's face. He knew, then, that this was not a negotiation. "You put your hands on her," Dante continued, his voice a quiet, conversational monotone that was far more terrifying than any shout. "You threatened her. You threatened my block, and you came into my cafe." "Please," Brent whispered, his bravado shattering, revealing the weak, pathetic man beneath. "Don't. I'll leave. I swear." "You'll leave," Dante agreed. He looked at Rico, who handed him a simple, heavy tire iron. "But you'll leave broken, so you remember." Brent tried to run. Dante was faster. The first blow was not to his head, it was to his knee. Brent screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the concrete. He collapsed. Dante stood over him. "This," he said, "is for the balcony." He brought the iron down on Brent's other knee. The sound of it was wet and final. Brent was sobbing, a blubbering, incoherent mess on the dirty floor. Dante crouched, grabbing a fistful of Brent's expensive, styled hair, and slammed his head back against the concrete, just once, hard. He brought his face close, his voice dropping to a promise that was colder than the grave. "I didn't kill you, because she asked me not to. She is merciful. I am not." He let him go, and Brent slumped, blood and tears and snot smearing his face. "You will vanish," Dante said, wiping his hand on a clean cloth Rico handed him. "You will not go to a hospital here. You will not file a police report. You will not call her, or text her, or write her name in a bathroom stall. You will crawl out of my city and you will never, ever come back. Because if I see your face again, if I even hear your name spoken on this block, I won't stop next time. I will find you, and I will end you." He turned and walked away. "Rico, put him in his car and pointed at the tunnel. Make sure he's the only one in it." Brent vanished. It was as if he had never existed. His rental car was found abandoned near the Lincoln Tunnel. His room at the Beacon Motel was empty, the bed unmade. 2 detectives came by May's apartment. They were bored, overworked, and clearly annoyed to be on the 4th floor of a walk-up. "Lena Carver?" one asked. "Yes," Lena said, her hands clasped tight in front of her. May stood just behind her, a silent, solid wall. "We're following up on a report. Man named Brent. Last name's... yeah, Brent Collins. You know him?" "He's my ex," Lena said, her voice quiet. "Yeah, well, his landlord back in Pennsylvania filed a missing persons report. Hasn't paid his rent. His car turned up. We were told he might have come to see you. You seen him? He came to the cafe where I work," Lena said, her voice shaking just enough to be credible. He threatened me. He said if I didn't come home, he'd ruin me." The detectives looked at each other, their boredom replaced by a flicker of understanding. This was a story they knew well. "And did he," the first cop asked, "threaten you?" "Yes, I was terrified, but then he just left. I haven't seen him since." "He say where he was going?" "No, he just left." The second cop looked around the hallway, his eyes landing on the 4B on the door. He glanced at his notepad. "This building is owned by a Dante Morello. He around?" "He's the landlord," May cut in, her voice sharp. "He keeps to himself. What's this got to do with him?" The detective's posture changed. The name Morello, spoken in this building, meant something. It meant paperwork. It meant trouble. It meant closing the case. "Right," he said, flipping his notebook shut. "Well, if he shows up, Miss Carver, you give us a call. But sounds to me like he just moved on. Sometimes they do that." They left. Lena shut the door, locked the deadbolt, and leaned her forehead against the wood. She was shaken. Her body was still thrumming with the low-grade terror of the last few weeks. But as she stood there, in the silence of the apartment, she realized something. The air was still. The phone wasn't going to ring. No one was going to chime the bell at the cafe. No one was watching her from a parked car. It was over. Later that afternoon, she went into her small room. She opened the window. She stepped out onto the fire escape, into the bright, hot daylight. She wasn't hiding in the dark. She stood on the metal landing, her hands on the railing, and she took a breath. It was the first deep, true breath she had taken in 3 years. It didn't catch in her throat. It didn't burn her lungs. It filled her. From the soles of her feet to the top of her head, the city was loud around her. Kids yelling, cars honking, but in her chest, there was a profound, shocking, and total silence. She was free. Dante kept his distance. His promise had been kept. Brent was gone. Lena was free. And now, he didn't know what to do. His SUV was back in its spot. He watched her. He saw her walk to work, her head held high, not huddled in fear. He saw her come home with a bag of groceries. He saw her smile at one of the corner boys. She was fine. She was living. He hadn't gone near her. He didn't go to the cafe. He didn't wait on the stairs. He had been her protector, her anchor in the storm. But the storm was over. What if she only wanted him for the safety? What if, now that the danger was gone, she would look at him and only see the monster who had solved her problem? He had kissed her. He had held her in his bed, but that was all tangled up in fear and adrenaline. He was the landlord. He was the darkness. She was Lena. She deserved the light. He had vowed to give her peace. Maybe that peace meant an absence of him. The thought left a cold, hollow ache in his chest that no bullet graze had ever matched. Lena waited 3 days. 3 days of freedom, 3 days of breathing, and 3 days of an agonizing, crushing silence. Dante was gone. He was across the street in his dark car, watching, but he was gone. She had her peace, and it was empty. She'd run from one man who wanted to own her. She'd been terrified of another, but she'd been wrong. Dante hadn't taken her freedom. He had, in his own brutal, violent way, handed it back to her, and he was letting her choose. She made her choice. That evening, she showered. She put on a simple, pale yellow sundress May had helped her buy from a local shop. It was the first new piece of clothing she had bought for herself. She brushed her hair. She put on no makeup. She slipped her bare feet into sandals. She walked out of the apartment past a surprised May and up the stairs. She didn't hesitate. She walked to the penthouse door and knocked, her knuckles firm. He opened it. He was in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, his feet bare. He looked undone. He looked surprised. His dark eyes were guarded, his face unreadable, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. They stared at each other for a long, silent moment. "You promised I'd never have to look over my shoulder again," Lena said, her voice quiet but clear in the hallway. "You kept that promise." He just nodded, his jaw tight. "But you didn't promise to stay away," she said. "So don't—" She walked past him, into his apartment. He shut the door. The sound of the deadbolt clicking home was a final, sealing sound. He turned. She was standing in the middle of his living room, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun, which poured through the massive windows. She looked so small, so fragile, in his stark, empty fortress, but she wasn't. She was the strongest person he had ever known. He didn't move. He was afraid to. She took the power from him. She was no longer the victim. She walked toward him, her steps measured, certain. She didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of him, her head tilted back to look up at him. "You're not him," she whispered. "I was scared, and I was wrong." She lifted her hand, not in fear, not to bandage him, but in a gesture of pure choice. She laid her palm flat on his chest, right over his heart. It was hammering, a frantic, trapped bird against her hand. His hands came up, hovering at her waist, not daring to touch her. "Lena," he breathed, his voice raw. I'm... She silenced him. She rose on her toes and kissed him. This time, she was the one who took the lead. It was not a kiss of fear or adrenaline or desperation. It was a kiss of gratitude. It was a kiss of claiming. It was a kiss that said, I am here. I am whole, and I choose this. A sound broke from his throat, a low groan of surrender, and his arms finally closed around her, pulling her tight against him, his hands gripping her back as if he would never let her go. He kissed her back. All his control, all his distance, shattering. He poured all his loneliness, all his dark, silent worship into that kiss. He picked her up, his arms strong under her legs, and carried her to the bedroom. He didn't turn on the lights. They made love in the twilight, in the silence. It was not like the first time, which had been a frantic shield against the dark. This was a slow, deliberate unwrapping. This was about hearts, exposed and raw. Lena was the one who guided them. Her hands explored his face, his shoulders, the old scars on his ribs. She was not afraid. She learned the landscape of him. He let her, his body trembling under her touch, his devotion absolute. He moved over her, his forehead pressed to hers, their hands laced together, his fingers gripping hers. They just looked at each other, their eyes speaking a language of broken pieces and profound healing. It was a silent, solemn vow. When he finally made them one, it was a slow, reverent act of belonging. It was not a taking. It was a homecoming. Lena quit her job at the Daily Grind. Sal was sad to see her go. She found a new one, a full-time position with benefits, at a bright, upscale cafe across town. It was a place with big windows, pastries made by a French chef, and customers who tipped in double digits. Dante never came there, not during the day. He respected her new life, her professional space. He would not taint it with his presence, with the whispers that followed him. But at 7 o'clock, when her shift ended, his black SUV was always there, parked across the street, a silent, waiting shadow. She would walk out and he would get out, open the passenger door for her, and they would drive home. It was private. It was respectful. They found their rhythm in the quiet moments. They rarely went out. Their world was the apartment, the roof, and the late-night walks. One night, they were walking in the park, long after the families and joggers had gone home. The moon was high, casting silver light on the empty pathways. He stopped her under a large oak tree. "I have something for you," he said. He pulled a small, dark blue box from his pocket. She opened it. Inside, on black velvet, was a silver necklace. It wasn't delicate. It wasn't covered in diamonds. It was a heavy, solid, beautifully made chain, like a piece of polished liquid armor. She was speechless. He took it from the box. "Turn around," she did, lifting her hair. He fastened it around her neck. It was cool, and then immediately warm against her skin. It was heavy, a noticeable, comforting weight. She turned back to him, her fingers on the metal. "So even when I'm not near," he said, his voice low, his rough thumb tracing the line of the chain to where it settled in the hollow of her throat, "you know who you belong to." She met his eyes, and she understood. It wasn't a collar. It wasn't a brand of ownership. It was a tether. It was a shield. It was his promise, in metal, that she was his. Not his property, but his responsibility, his heart. A rival crew, the same ones from the purple car, tried to stir up trouble again. They thought Dante's handling of Brent was a sign of weakness. They mistook his mercy for a lack of resolve. His men prepared for war. Rico was checking weapons, his eyes bright, but Dante handled it differently. He didn't meet them in a garage. He didn't use tire irons. He made 2 phone calls. One to a contact in the Port Authority, which shut down the crew's main smuggling route. The second to a bond enforcement agent who just happened to be looking for the crew's leader on an old warrant. It was bloodless. It was precise. It was devastating. His men were stunned. They looked at him with a new kind of awe. He was not just a brawler. He was a king. Dante, for his part, found that he preferred it. The clean, quiet victory felt better than the hot, coppery taste of violence. Lena's influence wasn't making him soft. It was making him smart. Lena's confidence, no longer suppressed by fear, began to bloom. The woman who had arrived with just a backpack started to take up space in the world. She found a community support group held in a church basement for women who had survived relationships like hers. The first time, she just listened. The second time, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. She told her story, and in telling it, she took away its power. She bought a sketch pad and a set of charcoal pencils. She started to draw again. She drew the view from Dante's window. She drew May's hands, wrinkled and strong. She drew the sharp, beautiful lines of Dante's face while he slept. She saw the quiet yearning in May's eyes and started saving. "You should go. May," she said one evening, pushing a small stack of bills across the kitchen table. "Go see your cousin in Florida? Take the bus trip you're always talking about?" May wept, and for the first time, they were tears of joy. Lena was building a life, not just inhabiting one. She walked home, the silver necklace a comforting weight under her shirt, her head high, smiling at the corner boys who were no longer her guards, but her neighbors. She would step into the building, into the arms of the man who waited for her, and the city, for once, seemed to quiet around them. The peace lasted for 6 weeks. It was a new, strange, and beautiful reality for Lena. Her life, once defined by the 4 walls of a room and the sound of a key in the lock, now stretched across the entire city. She excelled at the new cafe, her managers praising her quiet efficiency and her gentle way with customers. She filled 3 sketchbooks. She went to her support group every Tuesday, and her voice, once a whisper, was now clear and steady when she spoke. She and Dante had settled into a rhythm that was as solid and dependable as the city itself. Theirs was a love built in the quiet. It was in the way he'd be waiting for her at 7, the passenger door already open. It was in the way she'd sit on the floor of his apartment, sketching, while he worked silently at his desk. The only sounds, the scratch of her charcoal and the turn of his page. It was in the weight of his arm over her in the dark, the heavy, constant proof that she was not alone. The past was a scar, but it was a scar that had finally healed, no longer tender to the touch, until the text message. She was on her break, sipping a coffee, when her phone buzzed, an unknown number, just a link. Curious, she tapped it. Her world dissolved. It was a blog, a public, anonymous blog, and it was full of pictures of her, pictures she had never known he'd taken. Her asleep, her face slack, her mouth open, her stepping out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, her in old, worn-out underwear, reading a book. They were not pornographic, but they were intimate, private, and deeply, viscerally humiliating. The post was titled, "The Whore of Brooklyn." Below the photos was a text, written by him. It detailed, in laughing, cruel prose, how she was broken, damaged goods, how she'd run away, and how she'd shacked up with a greasy, third-rate wop who thought he owned the block. Her coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the pavement. She couldn't breathe. The cafe, the sun, the people walking by, it all vanished. She was back on the balcony. She was cold. She was barefoot, and he was watching her through the glass. Another text came through. From the same number. "I told you I'd ruin you. Everyone sees you now. Lena, just like I do. Damaged." She didn't cry. She didn't panic. The woman who had run from Brent was gone. The woman who had bandaged Dante remained, a cold, quiet, and profound rage, an anger she had never known she possessed, rose in her. This was not a fight. This was an extermination. She walked out of the cafe, leaving her apron, her bag, everything. She walked the 30 blocks back to the apartment, her mind a sheet of ice. She found Dante on the roof, the one where they had sat before. He was meeting with 2 of his men. He saw her face and his world stopped. He dismissed the men with a single, sharp gesture. "Lena," he said, his voice low, already sensing the disaster. "What's wrong?" She didn't speak. She just handed him the phone. He read the text. He saw the photos. He saw the title of the post. Lena watched his face. She had seen his rage before, the explosive coldness. This was different. This was a stillness that was almost supernatural. He didn't speak. He didn't swear. He just handed the phone back to her, his movements economical, precise. "Go to Maze," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Lock the door. Do not come up here. Do not leave the building. Dante." "Go," he commanded. She went. Dante stood on the roof, the city spinning out below him. He felt the bloodlust rise, the familiar, hot, iron taste of it. He wanted to find Brent, not with a tire iron this time, but with his bare hands. He wanted to tear him apart, piece by piece, for this. This was a violation that muscle and bone could not repay. He made a call. "Find him. I don't care where he is. I don't care who he's with. Find the electronic trail. Find the source of this post. I want him." It took his contact, a man who lived in a windowless room and spoke only to computers. Less than 1 hour. "He's in Ohio." The voice on the phone said, "Small town outside Cincinnati, using a burner, but he paid for his motel room with a credit card. He's a fool." Dante hung up. He went to his apartment. He opened a closet. He pulled out a long, black duffel bag. He was packing. He was going to Ohio, and he was going to put Brent in the ground. He was zipping the bag when his apartment door opened. Lena stood there, her face pale, her eyes burning. "You're leaving," she said. "I have to handle this," he said, not looking at her. How? How are you going to handle it? You're going to kill him." "Yes," he said. There was no point in lying. "No." He stopped. He finally looked at her. "He did this to you, Lena. He put you on display for the world. He called you that there is no other solution. This ends tonight." "You're right," she said, her voice shaking but her resolve like steel. "It does end, but not like that." She walked toward him, stepping between him and the bag. "You made me a promise. You stood on this roof and you promised me I would never have to look over my shoulder again. This is me keeping that promise," he bit out, his control cracking. "No," she said, her voice rising. "This is you breaking it. If you go there, if you kill him, you bring his world into mine forever. The police, the questions, they'll come. They'll find a link. They'll find me. I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Not for him, but for you, for what you did, for the world you live in." He stared at her, the terrible truth of her words slamming into him. He was trapped. His very nature, his instinct to protect by destroying, was the one thing that would ultimately poison her. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered, his rage collapsing into a raw, helpless frustration. He can't get away with this." Lena put her hands on his chest, right over his heart, her touch grounding him. "I know, but you said it yourself. He's a fool. You're not. You're smart. You're better than this. You're better than him. You don't beat him with your fists. You beat him with your head. Find another way, a way that doesn't leave blood, a way that sets me free. Dante, not one that just puts me in a different cage." Dante looked down at her, at the absolute, terrifying trust in her eyes. She was asking him to be a man he had never been. He let out a long, shuddering breath, and then a slow, cold smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You're right," he said. "He's a fool, and fools always leave a trail." He nudged the duffel bag with his foot. "I'm not going after him." "Then what?" "I'm ending this another way. You won't have to look over your shoulder." He picked up his phone. He didn't call Rico. He didn't call his muscle. He called a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. He called a man in a $3,000 suit, a lawyer whose firm Dante's family had kept on retainer for half a century, a man who specialized not in criminal law, but in corporate compliance and fraud. "Mr. Bianchi," Dante said, his voice smooth. "I have a project for you, a man named Brent Collins." "Yes, Collins. He's in Ohio. He seems to have a habit of committing wire fraud. He also has several outstanding harassment complaints against him in 3 different states. Oh, and he's running an online blog dedicated to criminal libel. I want you to find every illegal thing this man has ever done, from unpaid parking tickets to tax evasion, and I want you to give all of it in a neat, tidy package to the U.S. Marshals. I want him buried under the system." Dante listened. "Yes," immediately. "Whatever it costs." He hung up. He looked at Lena. Brent thought he was a manipulator, but men like that, men who control people, they're always sloppy with money. They think they're above the rules. They're not. He's just a common criminal, and he's about to find out what the real law looks like. It took 2 days. Brent Collins was not just a fraud. He was a spectacular fraud. He had embezzled over $60,000 from his previous employer. He had 2 outstanding warrants for aggravated harassment from women he'd dated before Lena. He hadn't paid taxes in 3 years. He was arrested at his motel, not by local cops, but by a team of U.S. Marshals. They didn't care about the blog. They cared about the federal wire fraud charges. The blog disappeared offline 45 minutes later. The trial was a formality. Brent's arrogance dissolved in the face of federal prosecution. His case was a mountain of evidence. The only thing left was sentencing, and for that, the judge wanted to hear from his victims. Lena did not have to go to Ohio. She testified via Zoom, from a sterile conference room in a lawyer's office downtown. Dante was not allowed in. This was her fight. She appeared on the large screen in the courtroom. She saw Brent. He was in an ill-fitting suit, his lawyer beside him. He looked thin, sallow, and pathetic. His magic was gone. "Miss Carver," the prosecutor said, "can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" Lena sat up straight. She wore a simple black blouse, her hair pulled back. The silver necklace was visible at her throat, a hidden piece of armor. She was calm. She was strong. She was powerful. She spoke. Her voice did not waver. She told them about the financial control. She told them about the isolation. She told them about the stalking. She told them about the balcony. She told them about the blog, about the humiliation, about the final, desperate attempt to ruin her life because he could no longer control it. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge turned to her. "Miss Carver, do you have a final statement you wish to make to the defendant?" Lena looked into the camera. She was not looking at the judge. She was looking directly at Brent. He was staring at his hands, unable to meet her gaze. "Look at me," she said. Her voice, amplified, echoed in the courtroom. He flinched, slowly. He raised his head. She stared at him, at the man who had stolen years of her life, the ghost who had haunted her every step. He was just a man, a small, weak, and pathetic man. "You don't own me," she said, her voice clear and cutting. "I am not your property. I am not your damaged goods. I am not your victim. I am free, and I am not scared of you." Brent was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Lena walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright afternoon sun. She stood on the crowded sidewalk, and for the second time, she breathed. But this breath was different. The first one had been relief. This was victory. She had closed the chapter. She had written the final word. She closed the book for good that night. Dante didn't take her home. He drove, his hand covering hers on the center console, the SUV silent. He drove through the city, over a bridge, to a part of Brooklyn she didn't recognize. He parked in front of a tall, elegant, pre-war brownstone on a street lined with trees. "Where are we?" she asked. "A place I've been working on," he said. He led her inside, up a flight of stairs, and then up another, narrower flight. He unlocked a heavy steel door, and she stepped out. Not into an apartment, but into the open air. They were on the roof, but it wasn't a bare, concrete ledge. It was a garden. It was his secret space. All around them were large wooden planters overflowing with flowers, roses, lavender, and night-blooming jasmine. String lights were woven through a small trellis, casting a warm, golden glow. In the center, a small table was set for 2, surrounded by dozens of white candles. And from a small, hidden speaker, her favorite music was playing, a soft instrumental piece. "Dante," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "This is beautiful." "It was my mother's," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Before she left, she loved flowers. I kept it. No one else comes up here. Ever." He was showing her his soul, the one piece of him that wasn't steel and shadow, the one piece that was soft, that remembered his mother. that knew how to grow things. He led her to the table and pulled out her chair. He poured her a glass of wine. They sat in the candlelight, the city a distant, glittering carpet below them, the air smelling of jasmine and wax. "To you, Lena," he said, raising his glass. To today, to your strength. "To us," she replied, her eyes shining, clinking her glass against his. After a long time, he stood up and came to her, taking her hand, pulling her to her feet. He held her, his arms wrapped around her waist, and they swayed slowly to the music, not speaking. "I love you," she whispered into his chest, her heart so full it ached. "You? You saved me." "No," he said, his voice thick, pulling back to look at her. "You saved me. I was just darkness. Lena, I was just my father's son. You made me something else." He reached into his jacket pocket. She tensed, thinking. For a wild second. It was a ring, but it wasn't. He pulled out a set of keys. They were new, shiny, and attached to a simple leather fob. I don't know how to do this," he stammered, the great, powerful Dante Morello, fumbling for words. I can't give you a normal life. I can't give you white picket fences. I am what I am, but I can give you this." He pressed the keys into her palm. "It's a new apartment," he said, his voice raw. "The brownstone, downstairs, the whole second floor. I had it redone, from your sketches. The big windows you liked, the color you were talking about for the walls, a studio, for your art." Lena's knees went weak. She looked from the keys to his face. It's not for me," he said, rushing. "It's for you. It's in your name. Only your name. There are no strings, no shadows, no landlords, just us. A future, if you want it." He was proposing, not with a ring, a symbol of possession, but with keys, a symbol of freedom, a home. Tears, not of fear or sadness, but of pure, profound joy, streamed down Lena's face. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion, but of deep, earth-shattering love. It was slow, and it was tender, and it was a promise. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes." She pulled back, her hands on his face, his dark, beautiful, complicated face. "You never asked me to be yours." She wept, her voice thick with emotion. "You just made it safe to be myself." He held her, his forehead pressed to hers, and for a long time, they just stood there. Two broken, solitary people who had somehow, against all odds, become whole. The final scene. Weeks later, Lena is walking home, but she's not walking back to Maze. She's walking to the brownstone. It's late autumn, and the air is crisp. She's wearing a coat, and she's smiling, a real, easy smile. She passes people. She nods. She's just another woman in Brooklyn. The silver necklace, her tether, her anchor, shines at her throat, a secret comfort. She turns the corner onto her street, the one with the trees. He's there. Dante is waiting for her, sitting on the top step of their stoop. He's not the lion guarding his territory anymore. He's just a man, waiting for the woman he loves to come home. He stands as she approaches. He doesn't say a word. He just opens his arms. Lena steps into his embrace, sliding her arms around his waist, pressing her face into the familiar, safe warmth of his chest. He holds her tight, his chin resting on the top of her head, and as they stand there, holding each other on the steps of their home, the entire city, with all its noise and all its rage and all its history, seems to quiet around them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey with Lena and Dante. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more content just like this. And please share your thoughts on the story in English.